a lot of these women are dancers, and there's not much of a forum for dance in America, but especially in Dallas, Texas. If you would like to have that kind of career, it's almost maybe cruise ships. I don't even know what you would do. So, think about like in a lot of ways, this is just a corollary to someone playing sports in high school and continue on in sports. It just so happens that makes sense when sports is very lucrative. This is not very lucrative. But at the same time, there's not a lot of forums. Then you combine that with the insane status of 36 coveted women. As one of the 1979 movies about them said, the 36 most beautiful women in Texas. We've got a talent contest and a beauty pageant all wrapped up in one. Now, that's like, I always think about like, why are women on The Bachelor? And it's like, because honestly, people just want to win. Like, you're just curious, like, maybe I'll win. Like, people told me that. So there's that. Then a lot of these women love football. They grew up in football family. Not all of them are from Dallas, but most of them had dads that watched the game, and where a little girl sees herself on that field is on the sidelines with those cheerleaders. And you have a dream. I mean, I had it too. I'm going to be one of them. I'm going to, on some primal levels, like I'm going to matter to my dad. I'm going to enter. And so many of these girls say like, I'm going to make my dad proud.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Tonight, we're getting off the Bruce train, but he will come up as he normally does. And tonight, we are talking Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, sobriety, writing a book, exposing your inner demons, and we're going to talk ELO and Xanadu. Because I promised Sarah we're going to. Sarah Hepola, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So why don't you tell my audience a little about yourself?
Oh, good God. Well, I mean, I'm a writer and I've worked in writing. That's such a vague term, right? What does it mean?
Yeah.
And for me, it's meant a lot of different things. I started in the alternative news business with the Good Times folks at the Austin Chronicle, covering entertainment in the late 90s and early aughts. And I was a music editor at the Dallas Observer. In my mid-20s, I quit everything, sold everything, and traveled for a year and blogged about it. So I was a blogger for a while, when that was a cool thing to be. I, at some point, moved to New York and was blogging for a literary sex site called Nerve. I wrote video game reviews. I've just done so many different things, but what I ended up kind of carving out a real niche in was personal essays.
Yeah.
And I ran the personal essay site for an online magazine called Salon from like 2006 to 2013. During an era when personal essays were really taking purchase on the internet and in the American imagination. And thanks to clickbait and a new confessional, I guess, like vibe in the country. And in 2015, I wrote a book, a memoir that was about quitting drinking. It was called Blackout. It was about why I fell, how I fell in love with alcohol and why I walked away from it. I'm 11 years sober. That book was successful and I was really lucky. And I was on this sort of like talk about your book as a professional job for about 2 years, more or less, while doing some freelance work. And I sold a second book because I was running out of money and I didn't really know what the second book was going to be about yet, which is a terrible idea, but I did it anyway. And I needed another project to kind of float me through as I was figuring that book out. And my editor at Texas Monthly, where I was a contributor, said they were looking for someone to do a podcast, and they said, what about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders? And I was like, whoa, because I had been obsessed with the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders since I was a little girl. Because when I was 5 years old, I fell in love with this poster that's behind me. We're probably just audio only, so they can't see it, but
Yeah.
you can.
Right.
And it has this ferocious redhead. Her name is Suzette Russell. I
Uh-huh.
could never find her for the podcast, but well, I could find her, but she's very
She don't
shy.
want to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, she don't want to talk. But yeah, I fell in love with them, and I felt like they had kind of like created this blueprint for beauty on my brain, but also in the American imagination, because they had ridden this huge, wave of popularity throughout the late 70s and 80s. And they were one of these things that was such a part of our culture. People almost forgot that they had an origin story, almost forgot that they were kind of complicated, I guess, aspects of feminism tangled up in this story, by which I mean the sexualization of women, the fight over pay, what women's status, where it derives from, the importance of beauty, how much we want to premise that in our value. Feminine arts brought into the gladiator arena of sports, because this is these women are dancers, even though they're often referred to as rump shakers, and like tata wavers or whatever. I don't know, that's a bad phrase, but like whatever people are saying is a sort of dismissive, degrading thing. They're actually at this point very elite dancers. So that podcast became the hardest project of my career. I thought I was going to do it on a whim. It was like almost broke me. It took me more than a year and a full team. It's called America's Girls. It's 8 parts, and I'm very proud of it. Even if it sucked, I think I'd be proud of it, because I finished something that I really so badly wanted to quit. But since then also, like this scandal around the Cowboys has hit, and so I've become one of them. I think it's, aside from being a sober person, because I really, really love drinking, so the idea that like I'm a spokesperson for sobriety is really wild. But an even wilder plot twist in my story is that I am now kind of a sports journalist.
Well, so what I
and
thought was,
and by the way, like, if this is where we talk about passions, I have never followed sports. I grew up in Texas with a complete allergy to sports, never participated. Like, the fact that I am like, going on sports radio shows talking about the history of the Cowboys, it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind.
Well, I think so. And what's a couple of things to unpack. But the first thing I wanted to say is, you were on Mike Reiner's podcast, and it was such a great conversation. I reached out to you via social media, and you said, "Hey, I'm in. Sure, I'd love to talk with you." So I've done this deep dive that, from a distance, I'm almost stalking you, because I'm reading your book, I'm listening to the podcast, and I'm doing this deep dive into your creative life. And the more I delve into this, the more interested I was. I really have a lot to talk to Sarah about. And then my wife was like, you only have the one podcast tonight. Yeah. I said, but I don't know how long it's going to be. She goes, you're really excited about talking to her, aren't you? I go, I really am. And my wife doesn't listen to podcasts at all unless we're on a road trip. And then, we'll put that on the car. And I said, we need to do a road trip soon, because you would be fascinated by this America's Girls. And the podcast is so well done. The production values, the theme song, just the people you had interviewing, the way you guys told the story, it is really something you should be proud of.
Yeah, I am super proud of it. I love all the things that you listed. Our theme song is by the Bralettes, which is a 4 girl band from the Dallas area. And my mother really hasn't liked pop music since the Beatles started doing drugs.
Okay.
She is a classical music fanatic.
Yeah.
And she loves that song.
Oh, like, it's a great song.
Even my mom is like, I love this song. What is it? You know? and that's the lure of that song. And it and our production team at Texas Monthly, I'd never done a podcast, and I messed up all my audio equipment the first few interviews I went out on, and I was just that, like, they were so incredibly patient and expert. My producer Patrick Michaels and our sound engineer and producer Brian Standifer were just so incredibly good and careful, and it was really fun to sit in on like listening sessions with them and hear the level of nuance that they were noticing in these stories that, I mean, I just don't even have that eye for it, ear for it.
Yeah. So, and we're kind of jumping ahead of the agenda, but how involved were you with the writing and direction of the podcast? Because you are the host, and I call it, I'm listening to Sarah's podcast, but
Yeah.
unless it's a spare podcast like mine where I record it, I edit it, I put it out. When you have something that is as high quality as yours, I know there's a team, but so how much involved were you in the creative process?
I mean, very, but I had a ton of help.
Sure.
And, a lot of the episodes were sketched out with my producer, Patrick Michaels. I was doing all the interviews because I was in Dallas, and I kind of was the one that had the back story. We weren't really able to send anybody else out.
Right.
So I did, something like 50 on record interviews and probably 50 off the record. So it was just a ton of interviewing. And then what would happen is we'd get a transcriber, so we'd have transcriptions of those. And then I would write out a treatment of where I saw what I thought the episode was. And then Patrick would go in and kind of sketch it out, which was hugely helpful to me because I didn't know how to do that. And then I would go back to what Patrick did and like put stuff in my words or make suggestions. But I thought he had incredible instincts, and he saw things that I never would have seen. Like he built scenes I wouldn't have known, like little scenes of me showing up there, or little, so like things that they might have been more invisible to me, but Patrick could hear that they were neat and that they gave the listeners some texture.
Did you know what kind of 8 buckets you were planning to put the story in, or did that develop as you, like when you're sitting there, well, I want to do this, or did that kind of go kind of a mixture of, as we got more data, oh, I think there's enough information to talk about this now?
Yeah, it's both. And, I think it was pitched as a 10-part series. It went down to 8, then it went down to 7, then it went back up to 8. Yeah. And as that's happening, the episodes are shape-shifting. Right. I mean, it's almost upset, like it's darling in some ways to go back to my original pitch. I mean, it's so shallow. Like, I really didn't even know that I'd ever talked to cheerleaders because they were so hard to get a hold of in the beginning. Yeah. That the whole thing was conceived as like the cheerleaders' cultural impact. So I've got like entire episodes about hair, because I thought it would be an interesting way to talk about race, which it is, but like whole episode about hair is sort of not what we ended up doing. Right. We ended up going, we understood the first three episodes are kind of like your first introduction to what this organization is. They work as a unit, and they're all the late 70s. And then other than that, each episode kind of goes over a decade, goes across a decade. Excuse me. No. I smoke too much. And it tackles a theme, and those shape shifted again. I for a while, it was very hard for me to sell them on the idea that we should cover the reality show because we didn't really have a lot of material on it, and there was so much already out there. But I felt like it was the central idea of the last episode. And I think it was Patrick's idea to use Noah, the male DCC hopeful who wanted to be on the squad, as the way into that story, so that you got a little bit more of an unusual tale.
Yeah, because, my background, I didn't move to Dallas till 86. Grew up in Louisiana, moved around a lot. My dad was in the Army. And so I kind of made a joke that, oh, I've lived in Dallas now. I guess I can be a Dallas Cowboy fan, right? Because I was never a big sports fan. My family did not care about sports whatsoever. And I had friends that mocked people that if you ask them, who's your favorite team? Oh, who won the Super Bowl last year? Oh, that's my favorite team. Who won the
Mm-hmm.
NBA championship? Oh, that's my favorite team. I said, so gosh, I live in Dallas. I could actually become a Cowboy fan. And then I know this is an exaggeration, but there's so much truth in it. You don't understand how big a deal the Dallas Cowboys are till you live in this damn city. I mean,
Yes.
it is everywhere. Monday mornings after a game, the mood can change on whether they won or lost. And so all of a sudden I got swept into this. And I tell the story often when we're talking about this. My son's now 32, but when he was 3 or 4, it was the NFC Championship game where Barry Switzer's first year, they were down 3 touchdowns to nothing, like within the first 5 minutes. And my son, who's 4, just starts crying because he had just gotten conscious a little bit enough during the Super Bowl era. And he's like, I can't believe they're going to lose. And he's just crying. And my wife looks over at me and like, you did this. This is your fault. Well, now then, at 32, ever since he's graduated from college, no matter he's lived in Dallas, on Friday, he comes to the house. He spends all weekend with us. And on Sunday, we're all there in the game. And then on Monday, he goes back to his apartment so that we can do the Cowboy game together. It's that big of a deal. And so I had this casual knowledge of, oh yeah, they're beautiful. And I fell in love with the poster. I graduated high school in 1977. I remember that, that iconic poster.
Yeah.
And the first time I became aware is during the strike when the NFL and they started talking about the Dallas Morning News did a story about that these players were suing for more money, and the cheerleaders got $15 a game. That if someone should be striking, and I went, really? That's all they get?
Yeah, I think I remember that piece too, because they interviewed a leader named Terry Richardson.
Yeah.
And she says, we're not in this for the money. We do this for love.
So I told you I was going to ask this question, and I promised listeners we're going to get to music in a minute. We have a lot to talk about, but I always have problems judging when is someone passionate and when are they crazy. Like, they're like, oh, this person is pursuing their dream. They're going to be a actor. They are going to be a writer, and they've written, they've gotten 24 rejection letters. I mean, Brad Meltzer talks about that. His first novel was directed. I can't get the number. Like, there's only 24 publishers, and he was, 26 times rejected. That's right. 2 publishers rejected me twice. When do you go between you are inspired or you just, you need to give it up? And I find that the amount of crap they have to take, you just go, is this good? I mean, I'm not judging them. I'm just going, I don't know if I would put that much effort.
Can I ask you a question? Why is it your job to say whether it's good or not?
It is totally not. It is totally not. I guess, and I love that. The idea is I don't understand that drive. That's what gets me, right? That drive.
Well, let me help you.
Please.
Because I've spent a lot of time with this. So first of all, a lot of these women are dancers, and there's not much of a forum for dance in America, but especially in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
If you would like to have that kind of career, it's almost maybe cruise ships. I don't even know what you would do. So, think about like in a lot of ways, this is just a corollary to someone playing sports in high school and wanting to continue on in sports.
Okay.
It just so happens that makes sense when sports is very lucrative. This is not very lucrative. But at the same time, there's not a lot of forums. Then you combine that with the insane status of being one of 36 coveted women. as one of the 1979 movies about them said, the 36 most beautiful women in Texas. We've got a talent contest and a beauty pageant all wrapped up in one. Now, that's like, I always think about like, why are women on The Bachelor? And it's like, because honestly, people just want to win. Like, you're just sort of curious, like, maybe I'll win. Like, people told me that. So there's that. Then a lot of these women love football. They grew up in football families. They, not all of them are from Dallas, but most of them had dads that watched the game, and where a little girl sees herself on that field is on the sidelines with those cheerleaders. And you have a dream. I mean, I had it too. I'm going to be one of them. I'm going to, on some primal levels, like, I'm going to matter to my dad. I'm going to enter. And so many of these girls say, like, I'm going to make my dad proud. Because dads, like, there's all this messed up sexualization stuff that goes on with the cheerleaders. We could talk about that. The podcast covers it. But like, dads as a general rule, especially like Dallas Cowboys dads, are like super proud of their daughter being in there. And that is gold to a lot of these women who, you know, all of us have complicated relationships with our fathers, and the ability to like have a parent say like, you have made me so proud, is worth its weight in gold. And then I think you have to imagine, like, one of the things that almost to a person, every cheerleader described the exhilaration of game day. And it's such a cliche, but we have to think about the fact that energy creates, like humans in one area create energy. And when you're a cheerleader, you're standing in the blast field of that energy, and you're feeling something you might not ever feel in your life. You wouldn't feel outside of maybe being Steve Perry and Journey. 100,000 people roaring. And what's so interesting is a lot of these women would not have done this if they had to have their name on the back of their jersey, or they're not the spotlight. They like the anonymity of, there's 36 of you, you don't necessarily stand out, you're performing, but you're all performing as a unit, so you have the sisterhood. So it's not like Bruce Springsteen, who's out there and is either going to like make it or break it. It's the backing band that gets to the blast of energy that is Bruce Springsteen without quite the pressure of stardom.
You know, and as you're talking about this, I'm going to call BS on myself, because if someone has the dream to get a Olympic gold medal in archery or shooting, that there are not a lot of professional archers out there, right? Like, how are you going to do this, you know, as a living? This is what your passion is. You know, we don't sit there and go, well, gosh, why are you going through all that? No, you're going to, because you can get a gold medal. You want to represent your country and also represent yourself. And the way you're explaining this, it's the same similar goal. This is being the best of the best in this. And so I'm going to do what I need to do to get that status.
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, for better or worse, America is set up as a place where people pursue their dreams. It's part of our grand mythology.
Right.
And it is always surprising to me when somebody turns to someone else and says, but your dream sucks.
Right.
And I'm not saying I haven't done it or said it or thought it before, but I do see that happening a lot here. I always feel mixed about the reaction to the $15 a game. It's of course absolutely outrageous and actually probably criminal under the Fair Labor Standards Act, but or illegal, I should say. But I get mixed on it, because it's also, there's this other part of me that's like, my gosh, don't we all do things we love for no money? And isn't it a little bit lame that we have to monetize everything in order to assess its value? And the thing is that like, it really upsets me when I see bloggers and journalists dogging on the cheerleaders for their pay, when I know very well those bloggers and journalists are getting financially exploited by their publications themselves, and they're not standing up for it. They're not saying anything about it, but, you know, but they're pointing the finger at these women who they can post little pictures of, you know, in like, they don't even, like, they're totally blithely indifferent to this, as though they don't know better than anybody what's going on here. So I get a little bit defensive of the cheerleaders.
Well, no, and like as someone I know that I will do 2 to 3 interviews a week for this podcast, and I make no money on this thing at all. I do it
Right.
because I love talking to people. I love hearing their stories, whether they're a huge Electric Light Orchestra fan, whether they're a Springsteen fan, whether they're promoting their book, their podcast. I just like talking to people. So this is my hobby. The other thing that you made me think of is Mark Evanier is a blogger. He's a writer, very successful. He was kind of the executive producer for the Garfield comics for years. And he talked about he was in Vegas years ago. And his friend said, "Hey, I have a comp ticket for you, but you have to say yes before I give it to you." And Mark's like, "What? What do you mean?" "No, will you go to the show if I get you this free ticket?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, it's for Barry Manilow." And he's like, "Oh, I don't care. I'm fine. I go." And so he attended the show and he talked to a lot of people talking about how much Barry Manilow's music is spent to them. And he said that other times he had other professional musicians talk about what Barry does is easy. It's just so easy. And Mark said, "What I wanted to say is, I really admire you, Mr. Musician, because if it's that easy, you're turning away millions of dollars that you could make because you're too good to do this easy.
Yeah.
I really admire you for that."
Totally.
Right. And so that the whole the idea of doing it for love and doing it for things. And what makes me mad about the $15 is the organization paying them 15. That's what makes me.
That's the disgusting part, because they're asked to be starving artists and altruists in the context of a $6 billion franchise.
Yeah,
and that's the part that's disgusting.
It's Jerry's fault, as I'm wearing my t-shirt
today. Oh my God,
right?
I didn't see your shirt.
Yes, it's Jerry's fault.
Oh God, it is. I mean, the truth is, a lot of sports journalists that I know love him, and he's a amazing American figure.
Yes.
But my gosh.
And I just like the idea that, and you cover this so well in the podcast, that, okay, let's say for a while they're doing the games and they do it for the love of the game, that yes, they have to rehearse and they have to go through all this and they get that high of working to the game. And so, $15 is probably not enough, but they're doing it because they love. Okay. I don't think that's fair, but that's their choice. But then you have a poster that sells millions of dollars. You have calendars that start selling. You have playing cards. And all of a sudden, it's almost the same thing as college sports makes millions of dollars off these players. And if they take, they don't get anything. Now that's recently changed, right? So that's, as I was listening to this, I was like, how the greed that, and greed and hypocrisy just really bother me, Sarah. And so listening to this, your story, I go, you couldn't give them a taste. Now, you make it very clear things have changed now, but I mean, they were doing USO tours and they did it because, they wanted
to. With the USO tours in particular, that is often the highlight of a cheerleader's experience.
Yeah.
You have to understand, if you're a small town girl from Lindale, Texas, and all of a sudden you've been you're on the DMZ, or you're being helicoptered onto an aircraft carrier, it is wild, and it's the ride of a lifetime. And for many of them, it's the highlight of their life.
What a great experience, right?
But back to the merchandising, which I think, the analog that you use of college athletes is so good. So I had a very, one of my most deepest relationships that I formed with a cheerleader was with a 70s golden girl named Shannon Baker, now Shannon Baker Worthman. She's on my poster too. She's right here. I keep her right over my shoulder yelling. And she was the poster girl throughout the 70s. She's not in that 77 poster that sold 1 million copies. She was sick that day, but she's on everything throughout the late 70s. And she's the person in their press. And she was an SMU student, so like an honors student, so they had her talking to the press, and she was a trained ballet dancer, so they had her doing the flying jump splits, and she is used for everything, and she really just didn't think about it. Like back then, she was like, "Well, this is so cool."
Yeah.
And it didn't occur to her. And I remember we were sitting in her bedroom, and it was just flanked with memorabilia, frisbees, a doll, clothing, chewing gum, everything. And she's got it spread out all over the bed. And she's like, I've really been thinking about these college athletes. And I've really been thinking about my past in a different way. And they used to always, back in her day, every journalist asked her, do you feel sexually exploited? And she was like, no, because she didn't. She was a great dancer. First of all, the uniform was very similar to what she wore as a ballet dancer. It just didn't really strike her as that. But looking back, she's like, God, I think maybe I was financially exploited. I don't want to put words in Shannon's mouth.
Right.
But I mean, she said it, basically as much on the podcast. And that was so interesting to watch these women. Shannon's in her 60s or early 60s now, looking back at these years when they were, 18, 19. We called it America's Girls because these women are often very young. They try out at 18, 19, 20. You think this woman right here is probably 19 years old.
Wow.
You think because of the stature and because you're seeing them on television that, they're 25, they're 30. There's like a Miss America thing that they all look 30. No, they're really young. And of course it was also about the way that they shaped American girlhood. But like they're so young. And I think a lot of them, I don't know how many of them would say they felt sexually exploited. I just didn't hear that many people that did, but the financial piece.
Definitely financially exploited. Yeah, I think so. All right, couple of things and then we're going to move on. Though I could talk about this. I sent you a link. There is a brilliant documentary all about Bill Finger. That is, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good, but I forgot to watch the trailer.
That's okay. That's fine. So the premise is, and for those of you guys that have seen it, Bob Kane is known throughout the world as the creator of Batman. But as you started looking more and more, what Bob Kane was the face, and he paid other people. And so a guy named Bill Finger invented Robin. He designed the uniform. He designed the Joker. He did the Batmobile. He did the Batcave. He did everything about this. And Bob Kane was the creator of Batman. In fact, all these movies, like when Michael Keaton's movie created by Bob Kane, all this great things. And so this documentary covers how, as they started exploring this, and there's interviews where Bob Kane admits, oh yeah, Bill did that part of it, but financially, Bob Kane got all the money. And so there is an episode you have dedicated to who created this iconic uniform, this uniform that is in the Smithsonian, next to Fonzie's leather jacket, next to,
Dorothy's ruby slippers.
Yeah. I mean, the original Kitty Hawk, plane. I mean, this is the Smithsonian, and I won't give away the episode, but one of the key people who designed it gets no credit, isn't there at they're not even asking for a taste of the money. It just would be nice to say, and spoil the ending, the movie, Batman and Bill, the ending, because Bill Finger had descendants still alive, they were able to sue DC Comics, and now then it says Batman created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. So, and that was more important to them than even the financial, though obviously when you've made billions of dollars off Batman, it is kind of nice. Hearing you tell that story made me think of that, because here are people that, I'm not saying I want a taste, it would be nice to have credit where credit's due.
The person that you're talking about is the founder of the cheerleaders. She's not just some rando that came up with a uniform. She's the woman who came up with the entire concept and was also never really given credit for that.
Right.
I mean, the depth to which her history is lost is profound and sickening to me. She is a true inspiration. She's one of my heroes. She was a model, a PhD, a mother, a senior programmer at PBS, an educator who helped to found the first community college here in Dallas, El Centro. Oh, and by the way, she founded the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. Oh, and by the way, she's 91 years old and she's total badass.
She's a badass, right? Yeah.
I just visited her on Saturday. I went out to go see her for the first time since the podcast. Now, one of the things that was hard about that is like, I don't want to say she didn't care. She does care. She did not share my outrage and my gall, because to her, it's like she's had a good life.
Yeah.
And she feels good. And there is some controversy over who created that uniform. There's someone else that was given credit that actually had quite a role in it. So nobody was going to fight her on it. And it's just, to the way that Dee sees it is like, no worries. I did other things. My impact was elsewhere. And for me, who was the person trying to pin this history down, I was like, this episode had me in tears. It had me in both women, because they both got the shaft. Right. Both women involved in this sort of like who did the uniform were both, just, you really go back to that era, that pre-feminist era of women's invisible work. And it's just like, Tex Schramm was the general manager, the legend, and he gets credit with creating those cheerleaders and creating that team. And by the way, he probably didn't even really think twice about them.
Yes.
Like he had so much going on running that football team. I promise you, he didn't go home and invent cheerleading on the side.
Right.
It was something that was done by the women he had enlisted to try to make a sideline entertainment more exciting. Yeah. And I'm sure he encouraged them to go showbiz because he was showbiz. But right. At the same time, the specific ideas that came to sweep the NFL and then sports culture, and really change the way women are in sports and television, like that's all this woman Dee Brock. Nobody's ever heard of her. Her name is actually Dorothy. I just learned that this weekend. I think that's beautiful. Yeah. Dorothy Faye Brock, but she thought Dee was like a little like had a little bit more kick.
Yeah.
And she's just an exceptional woman. I said to her, I got to say to her a line that I'd written for her. I said she was a woman of the world when the world could be quite small for women. And she smiled and she said, I really like that.
That is a great line. We're going to move to music, but I did want to know, do you think you're going to go back and revisit with all the things going on with
Hell yeah.
Dalrymple?
I mean, I've got to. Like, yes. I don't know. We're still figuring out if we're going to do a season 2. I really want to, but there's bandwidth both for the production team and for me. We've got a lot of things going on, and a podcast is an extremely heavy lift.
Yes.
The kind of podcast that we do. There are stories that just feel, it's like, it always felt incomplete to me that we didn't have the current cheerleaders director, Kelly Finglass. She is a fascinating person who has shepherded the cheerleaders for the last 30 years. And she was a fan of the podcast. And we were talking over Instagram before that scandal hit. And then that scandal hit. And it's like, boy, I mean, I have heard from her basically just to say that she's got other things to work on right now. Yes. She's not going to ignore me, but like, maybe we'll talk later, but no time soon. And, I'm also going deeper on the topics that we covered last time. A lot of this scandal, which if people don't know, basically the head PR guy, it's alleged that he was taking videos of 4 lead cheerleaders in the locker room at a special event in 2015. One of the women caught him, confronted him. He claimed it was an accident. He says he was in there 8 seconds. They say he was in there more like 3 minutes. This was eventually taken up by an internal investigation, and they ended in a settlement that was $2.4 million. The sort of details of which were revealed by the ESPN writer Don Van Natta Jr., a Pulitzer Prize winning, total badass, an absolute gentleman. I say that because I now talk to him quite a bit because we have such we're working similar territory, and he dropped that piece a couple weeks ago, and I think it's the first of several shoes that are going to drop for the Cowboys over the years. The Cowboys have always been seen as bulletproof. I guess we'll see if that's true.
Yeah, because I know that I'm a big a fan of the ticket, and and the guys are talking about, Jerry Jones never shuts up. He is a firm believer any publicity is good publicity, and he's going to talk. And it is all of a sudden there is silence coming from there. And I think it's going to be fascinating. Before this happened, the head guy that, if you've watched a Cowboy documentary since Jerry Jones bought the team, you have seen Rich Dalrymple. You have seen him in the background. In fact, my son would say, "There's Rich." Rich is going to get his face on that camera. And to have him retire a few weeks before this broke with I've decided to retire. I'm going to go.
And no statement from the Cowboys, which none of the sports journals really noticed. I don't think. They were just so sort of caught up in the wave of unexpected, this is happening. Nobody really went to look and see if oh, wow, the Cowboys never released a statement. There's nothing on social media. This is super weird.
Yes. So,
and the funny thing about Jerry not speaking right now, I think he declined to go to speak to reporters of the NFL draft or something like that.
At the combine. He always, it's the combine.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is, first of all, he went on that local radio station to talk about the scandal, which I don't know. It seems like a violation of the NDA that he signed over that scandal, as far as I could tell. A, and then B, his main cleaner upper was Rich Dalrymple, and Rich is gone. So it's you got to put the muzzle on Jerry Jones.
Well, and I think, I don't know if it was when the ESPN writer was on the ticket or with Mike, but I know it had to be the ticket, because the writer was talking about that one of the best known media, cleanup guys was contacting him going, "Hey, I'm representing the Cowboys. When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to talk." And, they made the joke, and me and our friends too, the Cowboys have that guy on speed dial, right? If he is not given a, oh, we're just going to give you X amount of money, keep you on retainer. As a fan of the Cowboys, I'm wishing the best, but at the same time, as someone that there is this hypocrisy and the rich gets richer and the others don't. I'm looking forward to seeing, and I am locked in. If it's season 2, I am ready. I have not watched one moment of the reality show. I don't watch much reality. Not that I'm a snob, because I watch a lot of bubblegum TV and a lot of science fiction and a lot of, I love pop culture. Just have never been a reality TV person. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of knew there was a show about the Cowboy cheerleaders, but it's just not in my range. And to hear this, it just was fascinating to hear your point. I totally, America's Girls, anywhere you can get a podcast, I promise you it is as good as any podcast I've seen. And there are, I know, Rachel Maddow had a podcast a few years ago all about Spiro Agnew and how, the whole, his political career. And there's been so many other stuff. This is as entertaining a podcast, and you will be fascinated. So check that out. Okay, we're going to take a break here. This is the end of my first part of the episode with Sarah. Come back tomorrow for a second part where we go into music. We talk a little bit about her book and her love of Xanadu, the soundtrack. So come back tomorrow. Thanks. This podcast would not be possible without my wonderful group of patrons. I want to send a special thanks to John Munson, Mary Thomas, Terry Smith, Dale Hosick, Andrew Goddard, Stephen Malio, Alex Samada, Anna Lynn, Chris Bloom, Holly Mack, and Captain America, aka Steve Rogers. Thank you guys for supporting the podcast. Your support means the world to me, and you are forever in my heart.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.